And so I'm going to ask Steve and Jean Case to come up on stage and join me. These are two entrepreneurs from the private sector who've decided to be entrepreneurs in philanthropy as well. Join me in welcoming them. Now, Jean started by saying, now feel free to ask Steve the first question. I have no intention of doing so. I'm going to show gender bias just absolutely, without shame, and ask you, what are the qualities, Jean, that you found as an entrepreneur that you found useful in applying to the task of philanthropy and social change in this manner?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Jane, for having us. It's a real wonderful opportunity to be here with all of you. That's a question we could probably throw out to the audience and have answered too, but I'll try and do the best job I can. We have many great entrepreneurs in the audience, and certainly that's been our background as well. But I think some of the key qualities that we see from entrepreneurs: a passion, a conviction, a sense of urgency in what they're trying to take forward, focus on action, and they're usually very results-oriented. And when you think about the things we're talking about at this conference, all of those things can be used in more supply, I think, in addressing the sort of key social issues of our day.
And when you were, Steve, when you were both at AOL, did you approach AOL as a mission-driven organization?
Oh, absolutely. Well, for AOL, we got started in 1985, but I first got interested in interactive service in the late 70s. And so I always believed, even though at the time we got started, people thought it was a little crazy. They didn't imagine the success of the Googles and the other companies today, because most people did not have personal computers. And the few people did have personal computers did not have modems. And indeed, most of the personal computer companies didn't believe it made sense to put a modem in a computer, because what would you do with it? Real people have no interest in this, wacky hobbyist, computer stuff. So it was always, it was certainly, we're building a business. We someday hoped it would be successful and valuable, but it was much more driven by a passion about the possibilities of this new interactive frontier, and the idea that if we got enough people online, it would kind of lower the barriers to entry, and you didn't have to own a printing press to be a publisher. You didn't have to own a TV satellite to be a broadcaster. Everybody could participate. So it was always a very mission-driven, passion-driven idea that happened to be wrapped in a for-profit enterprise. And one of the things we've learned over the past decade, trying different things, is there is a lot of commonality between those concepts. Sometimes the things you're pursuing may make sense to do through a more grant-centric philanthropic prism. Sometimes it may make sense to do it through a more for-profit, venture-backed kind of prism. And often there's a mix, something in the middle. It really depends on the idea you're pursuing, and it depends on your interest and expertise. But underlying all of them is the idea that there's some passion, some mission that really is driving this forward.
And that's very much sort of the theme of this conference, is the range from grants to mission investing. So, but back to just the entrepreneurial skills, Jean, one of the things an entrepreneur has to have is a willingness to take huge risks and to fail, and to pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and try again. Is that true in philanthropy too?
Yeah, I definitely think it's true. And philanthropy, and particularly the nonprofit world, as we've heard time and time again at this conference, doesn't have the traditional capital structures that are needed to really drive great opportunities forward. And we do see almost a different view of risk in the philanthropic world. Traditionally, there's been a sense that, an unwillingness to take great risk. But, we are seeing some real seeds planted and blossoming now in some of the early investments, particularly for social entrepreneurs. We heard about a bunch of them in some earlier sessions this morning. But the bottom line is, I think you're not two different people. When you're in business, you're the same person you are, I think, when you're trying to conduct your philanthropy. And it's, I think, important to bring the same principles to that. And it's not necessary to have a different expectation or avoidance of risk than you might have in the business that made you successful and gave you the resources to go forward in philanthropy.
There's been a big emphasis, of course, of late on measuring results, on ensuring results, measuring the return. And I'm wondering, is there a balance? Is there time sometimes when we become so focused on demonstrating results that we're unwilling to take that leap, to make that risk? And do we fall into the trap of doing only that which is clearly measurable sometimes? Yeah,
but this is true in the business world too. I mean, there are some parallels here. Some of them, good, maybe some not so good. I'd say the business world right now, one of the concerns many have, and I share, is that it's too short-term oriented. There's such a quarterly results metric-oriented focus that it's more difficult for companies, particularly when they're public, to be able to make longer-term investments, which is why there has been such a shift towards more private equity, and maybe you can make investments more in the context of a private company. So that some of the critiques of some of the not-for-profit enterprises are not metric enough driven. I think that's true, but you could also apply that critique to many companies that are too metric driven, particularly when the metrics are inevitably about short-term financial results. So I think in both cases, it's a matter of balance, making the right kind of investment so you're showing progress. I think one of the things that is helpful is to have clear metrics that people can hold you accountable for, and capital chases good ideas backed by good people who are showing good results, and it's harder to see that kind of results often on the not-for-profit sector because the metrics aren't as clear. But at the same time, it's not simply taking the easy route to short-term performance and potentially seeding some of the longer-term possibilities. So I think there's kind of lessons to be learned on both sides.
Yeah, that's great.
I think I'd add to that. I mean, some of it is, impact and measurement, no question, and I think all would agree more of that is needed in the space. But some of it is really just an issue of focus, or what we might call mission creep. If you don't have clear focus around what you're there to do, or that focus starts to blur or gets, bigger and bigger and bigger to where you're really out of line with what you started out to do, chances are you're not going to have the impact that you started with. And we do see that as kind of a critical issue, and often the thing that concerns donors, and rightfully so, or concerns investors. So I think it's, some of it is measuring impact, but a lot of it really is just about maintaining a very clear focus.
Well, Jean, the foundation that you run, the Case Foundation, provides its grantees much more than money. Do you help with business plans? Do you help develop the metrics? Tell us what more it provides to the grantees.
Sure, and it's tied a little bit to your question on metrics. I mean, metrics can be about a lot of different things, right? It can, as long as you have the focus so you know what you're looking for in the investment you're making, that's the key. And because we spend a lot of our investment of time and money at the foundation trying to help organizations scale, sustain themselves, build new business models that can be productive for them in the long term, the measurements we're looking for are not necessarily sort of, end user measurements, if you will, or end impact measurements. They're really more about, did we help strengthen that organization, or did we leave that organization in a stronger place to go forward than when we first came into it? But no question, a big part of what we've decided is where we can play a role, and was a need where we felt there was a comfortable slot for us to fit into, was to take the same talents, the same skills, and the same resources that worked for us in the business world and see if we might make them available to the nonprofit sector as well as to social entrepreneurs. And so that's where we spend a lot of our time and effort.
One of the things we learned last night was that Larry Page devotes any long vacations that he has to going to the developing world, to learning more about the kinds of problems he hopes to solve. Have each of you ended up spending a lot more time in the developing world than you might have done a decade ago?
That's right. So our foundation is 10 years old, and for about the first 5 years, we largely just did things on the domestic front. But we knew that we would ultimately go into the international markets or into the developing world. But just like we did at AOL, we felt like we kind of had to cut our teeth domestically doing this work before we could go out to the broader and somewhat harder and more confusing world of the developing world. So we started to get into this work about 5 years ago. We've participated in some things in the Middle East and in Africa particularly. Our largest initiative today is a clean water initiative in Africa. It really has what we call sort of the tenets of what we like and where we think we can uniquely play a role, and that is that our foundation has always said has been focused on leadership, collaboration, and entrepreneurship. And in this clean water initiative we discovered it in South Africa. It won the World Bank's program in 2000 on innovation. It beat out 1,500 other contestants. So it had been in our sights for a while, and we went and looked at it in the field a few years ago in South Africa, and there were 700 of these interventions at the time, and it's a child's merry-go-round.
Hello? Well, I'll explain what it is. It's a child's merry-go-round, and the way it works, tell me when you test it. I'll keep going. But it's all serious. Basically, the idea is to put a merry-go-round on top of a borehole. And when the kids go out and play and they spin the merry-go-round, it pumps water. They then store that water in a little tank. But they then sell little ads, billboard ads, around the tank, which provides a recurring revenue stream and also a reason to go back to that village periodically to change the ads, but also to make sure that the water system is working. So it seemed like a great idea that had been working now for a decade in South Africa. And we said, well, how do we take this to scale more broadly? And our goal now is to get this to 10 million people in 2,500 villages by 2010. We think that plan, given the track record over the past decade, is doable, and the core business model, going back to your point of metrics, is because they had a track record here, it was pretty clear what it cost to install a pump and pretty clear how many people on average would be served by it. So this initiative that we're leading is basically a $60 million effort that will get water to 10 million people in 3 years. $6 per person for water seems like a pretty good return on investment when, you know, if you go to your mini bar in your hotel tonight, you'll probably pay $6 for a bottle of water. But it was a proven idea that we thought was very creative in terms of how it was leveraging simple technologies. In this case, a merry-go-round essentially is a windmill on its side. And so as you spin it around, it can generate energy. In this case, it can pump water. And it's telling the kids, and often it's the girls, go walk 2 miles and don't go to school because we need some water. Now you can tell them to go outside and play. We need more water. We need you to play some more. It seems like a lot better way to do it. But marrying that with the storage idea and the billboard idea, we just thought was terrific. So it was a perfect example of something that we felt if we put more capital, but also assembled a team of people in terms of some of the expertise and got other people interested in joining us in this effort, we can take that idea to scale, and we're pleased to be part of it.
Now this, Jean, I know that you've got a handheld mic, and we know that you can project. This is a public-private partnership. And tell us something about your views of partnerships as an approach, and also what are the complexities of how do you deal with the power imbalances, et cetera? What are the complexities associated with helping to forge such a partnership?
Sure. Well, I think it seems pretty obvious that if we're going to solve the great social challenges of our day, it's going to take all of us pulling together. And I think traditionally sectors have looked at problems from within their sector lens. So certainly we did this in business more so. If you're sitting in a business, you think, well, what can business bring to this, or even what can my company bring to this? If you're sitting in the nonprofit sector, you're kind of looking at the world from that lens. And if you're in government, you're thinking the same way. But what we believe strongly is that these cross-sector opportunities exist in a really big way for everyone to have an appropriate role. So in the Clean Water Initiative, for instance, as many of you know, the administration has an historic commitment to Africa for HIV/AIDS, a large investment for about 13 countries in Africa. When we were there, we witnessed not only children, young girls who weren't able to go to school because they had to wait to go retrieve the water before they were allowed to go to school. We went to HIV clinics and saw very clearly that we'd invested in HIV therapies, but the water people were using to drink those therapies with was dirty water and was killing them. And that doesn't really seem too smart, does it? So we came back and we had conversations, and similarly, our government builds schools in Africa, But when they build the schools, they leave it up to the governments to provide the water supply, and the water simply isn't there. So the foodstuffs that are there at the school can't be made because there's no water to prepare the food. So there were several examples of where the government was making, in many cases, historic investments in the very areas we all care about, but there was something missing, some sort of plug-in role, if you will, that didn't allow it to be fully leveraged. So when we came back with this commitment to go forward with the Clean Water Initiative, the first thing we did was sat with the U.S. government and said, so we love what's happening. We're very excited by what's happening with the U.S. government investments, and we'd like a private sector initiative to ride alongside to really drive that and fully leverage it and reach more people. So, and now we have partnerships with other nonprofit organizations throughout Africa who are doing similar things at our same site. So investing in sanitation, hand washing training, et cetera. Things that, so you provide almost a hub and a spoke opportunity, if you will, but it's an opportunity for the private sector, for the nonprofit sector, and the government to play a role. And we just think these cross-sector ways of looking at things are where the really big opportunities will come from.
What's interesting about play pumps as an example is that the idea came from Africa. It was Africa-led. How important is that? That's
critical. And Jane, thank you for reminding me of that, because it's a technology that was invented in Africa for Africans, and the manufacturing and distribution takes place in Africa. So really what the private sector in the U.S. is doing is really coming along as a champion and helping to really drive it forward by bringing additional resources. But this was invented in Africa for Africans, so it's not something we're throwing over to that continent and saying, you know, isn't this great? It's something Africans determined they needed and wanted, and we're just helping them take it for themselves.
And also highlights, and we see some of this, some of the people attending this, the importance of building bridges between these worlds, because one of the founders of Play Pumps used to be in the advertising business. So he said, billboards. I'm not sure most of us necessarily would have said, well, let's build this water system and, you know, create a storage tank and let's put billboards on that we'll sell ads on the water tanks. But he had that perspective, and for us that was one of the breakthrough aspects of it, because it did provide a recurring revenue stream, and as I said earlier, a reason to come back to make sure the system is working, which is often a problem with these projects. They're installed and then for whatever reason a few years later they're not working, but, you know, nobody's back there to check on it.
We were talking earlier over lunch about sort of connecting the customer to the possibility of philanthropy, the customer to the opportunity for social change. Say a word about that as a general matter, the kinds of changes that you're seeing out there with Product Red, even with American Idol.
Right. Well, we're delighted to see more mainstream applications of, you know, that kind of hitting people where when they turn on the television or when they're shopping in a store, because again, blurring the lines between these worlds we think is one of the real opportunities. So we salute the folks at American Idol who are now making, you know, as part of the show that's, you know, the top-rated show in the country, every week talking a little bit about American Idol giving back, and I think in a couple of weeks now having the show that's dedicated to that, raising money partly from the corporate sector, but also encouraging people to give, and just as importantly, shining a spotlight on some of those issues. So people who are sitting there trying to decide, do they vote for, you know, I don't know, Lakeisha or Sanjaya or what have you, you know, also, you know, are being educated about some challenges, in this case in Africa, and be given an opportunity to do something that otherwise they wouldn't. Or Project Red, I think it's a great example of again, blurring the lines to get, you know, companies to create products that can generate a recurring revenue stream that provides a level of sustainability in terms of investment, which is one of the things, you know, for-profit businesses often are better able to do. It's not a new idea. The Girl Scouts have been doing it for a century. National Geographic has been doing it for a century. They started with the goal of educating people about the world, but instead of just having it done through the prism of a philanthropic initiative, they created a magazine and a membership, and then over time, you know, television channels and other kinds of things. And now it's a, you know, billion-dollar business that is doing a far more profound job of educating people about the world because of those other business initiatives. So trying to encourage that kind of integration is important, and looking for opportunities to really touch consumers, you know, where they live and where they're having, you know, experiences, we think is very profound.
I have to just tell you how impressed Jean looked when she found out that you knew who were the finalists on American Idol.
I was thinking he's giving it away. We're watching.
We do have I actually enjoy it. I think it's a lot of fun. We also have 5 kids, and they're pretty interested in it. So we're all familiar on the whole Sanjaya phenomenon. If you'd like to ask questions about that, I'd be happy to give you our opinion.
We'll be sure to report back to your kids that you're ready to field those questions. I should note that Richard Curtis from Comic Relief will be speaking tomorrow, and it was Richard's idea to go to American Idol, I mean, not to Comic Relief, and inspire them to use this as an opportunity to spread the word to a much wider audience. So yet another social entrepreneur at work. When you look at something like that, Jean, when you're going to have to be measuring the impact in a long term, but how important is broadening philanthropy itself in that way?
Yeah, I think it's huge. This issue of recognizing that the greatest power we can tap into is consumer and business spending. You know, it's a big idea. And these are, you know, some of the first efforts that we're seeing. We have traditionally seen some that Steve mentioned as well, but we think it's an idea whose time has come. But I think to get there, I told Jane earlier today that I came back from Europe last week, and when I was going through customs, the woman said, "What was your purpose of your travel to Europe?" And I said, "Philanthropy." She said, "What?" And I said, "Philanthropy." And she said, "What?" She said, "What's philanthropy?" And our kids have asked us the same question. You know, we talk in this space in a language that the average person doesn't understand. Even if you've been educated in this nation, we still use words and phrases. You'd never use them in consumer marketing. It's not how you'd talk to people if you were really trying to get them to buy your product or become aware of what you're trying to do. So I think there's a whole language set and a whole way of looking at where we're telling our story and who we're trying to reach that just needs to change for, you know, this true potential to fully be tapped. And it's something I think we're committed to do, and looking at ways that we can partner with others around new initiatives that will really aim to do just that and tap some of the trends around social networking, some of the technology revolutions we're seeing still taking place in this day.
And language is just sort of one of the barriers to the process of blending the private and the social sectors. Say something, Steve, about you've done a lot of public speaking about the importance of taking philanthropy beyond Philanthropy 1.0, and Judith Roden started our conference on that topic. Say something about what philanthropy would look like if you succeed in your advocacy.
Well, I think for the reason Jean said, maybe 20 years from now, there's a different word for it. It's more about giving or helping or what have you, and less institutional. But it's more having these blurred lines between the so-called businesses and the so-called philanthropic organizations. I think that's where the biggest opportunity is. If you asked me 10 years ago, I said, well, the way it kind of works here is if you're entrepreneurial and you start a company and it's, you're lucky enough to be successful, and at some point that company should create a little foundation to do some things that's, to supplement what they're doing, and at some point you made a lot of money personally, you probably should create your own foundation and do some things privately, which is sort of what we did. AOL started up, then we had an AOL Foundation, and we had a Case Foundation. And I think that's been terrific, and the kind of things we've been able to do through each of those has, I think, been constructive. But having a more integrated view of it seems to be the better answer, and not simply creating a foundation, which in too many companies is sort of a little bit of a silo, some people off on the side with some often somewhat limited budgets trying to do some interesting things. It really should be more core built into the company's mission, and the company's core businesses should be looking at ways to drive that forward. American Idol happens to be a current example of that. It's not something off on the side with the American Idol Foundation. It's American Idol gives back front and center to 40 million people every week. And so looking at ways to try to get the most from each of these, I think there's a role to be made through private contributions. Sometimes it doesn't make sense for the company to take the role directly, given the nature of the issue or the amount of capital it has, and people doing it more privately, I think makes sense. But in the long run, blurring the lines between those worlds, we think is going to be helpful, and ultimately it comes down to what are you trying to change? What impact are you trying to achieve? and what's the best way to achieve that impact. And in some cases, it will be through this prism. In some cases, it will be through that prism. In many cases, it will be through more of a integrated hybrid prism. So it's less about make the money over here and throw it over the wall and try to give back, and more trying to kind of live it and breathe it every day in a more integrated kind of way, and really using whatever tools are in the arsenal. Sometimes it's a hammer, and sometimes it's a saw, and sometimes it's something else to have the kind of impact you're hoping to achieve.
And we're seeing a lot of that in the information technology space, and obviously in the health space. I mean, big pharmaceuticals providing vaccines and treatments for the diseases of the poor. But what's happening in the financial community when Goldman Sachs makes the environment part of a deal? Are you starting to see a real shift in the world of finance as well?
Well, I think it's a broader corporate shift. I wouldn't limit to finance. And I think it's driven by a recognition that people want to do business with companies and work for companies that have more than just this quarterly's profit target in mind. There is a purpose to it, or a mission to it, some kind of calling to it. And in a global battle for talent, attracting people who want to be part of that effort is very important. And in a global battle for customers, having people want to do business with your company, obviously the core benefits of the product or service you're providing have to be there as well. But there's something more that the company stands for. I think there's a recognition that we're moving into that era, and sort of the next wave of capitalism, if you will have that aspect to it. And I think the savvier companies are trying to get in front of that and really take positive steps. I think a lot of it is because they really do believe it themselves. It's not it's not just opportunistic, but there's some aspect that also is recognizing that's where the puck is going, and we better. Wayne Gretzky was a great hockey player, not because he looked at where the puck was, he looked at where the puck is going, and the puck is going in the business world towards this companies doing more than just making money.
Now, Jean, you've had as part of your strategy funding, the foundation strategy, funding hybrid models. Playphones being an example. Is Kickstart also an example of a hybrid?
Yeah, Kickstart's a good example of a hybrid model. Kickstart, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is an effort, again, largely in Africa, focused in Africa. There are pumps that are affordable to small African farmers that are irrigation pumps, and it's almost like a treadle pump is what it's called. What's the exercise machine we use that does that? I can't think of the name of it right now. But you
Stairmaster.
Stair stepper, yeah, it's like a stair stepper that you stand on, and it irrigates if you have a hectare of land, and now you have an opportunity to irrigate that land. Suddenly you can get a lot more, sell that produce, then get 2 hectares of land. So it's really taking economic development kind of to a new scale across Africa with this small intervention on farms. That's another hybrid model, and what we loved about that was they're selling to small farmers. They feel, they'll save all of their family's meager earnings for a long, long time to buy this pump. The whole family will use it. Often your cousin will take it when you're not using it, and then your neighbor's going to, pay you to use it on Saturday. And it's a way that we're seeing some real economic development progress happen. Someone said in an earlier session, you really shouldn't always be so focused on the millions and millions that you need to get to in scale, that there are some small opportunities. This started as a small opportunity, but we're seeing it really sort of take hold across Africa, and we're very excited by it. But this idea of the blended model is something, again, in terms of just, big ideas, getting out of that old way of thinking that, today you're doing philanthropy, so you do these things, and tomorrow you're doing business, but asking, what are your core assets and skills? If American Idol had formed the American Idol Foundation and it sat off to the side and they were, anybody want to donate to us? They wouldn't have nearly had the impact of taking their core competency, what they're good at, their strategic assets, and applying them in this space. And so I think, that's the blended world. And Steve's new company is a great example of a blended world as well. I mean, in that particular situation, he's focused on healthcare. That could have been a foundation initiative, but it probably wouldn't have been very successful as a foundation initiative. We're thinking that the best bet is to make that a for-profit bet to address the healthcare needs. Another example of sort of how we view this blended world.
I'll turn to you and ask you about Revolution, but first, Stairmaster reminds me that when when I was in the policy world in Washington, D.C., they always used to say that Stairmaster was the ultimate Washington exercise. So it was a stairway, climbing to nowhere. And so this perpetual process. And so here's an example of something that is climbing to social change. But tell us about Revolution, because here's an example of putting a company to the service of a social objective.
Yeah, it was a mix of things coming together. I started Revolution about 3 years ago with the idea that there's always going to be things that are best done through the Case Foundation prism, including in healthcare. One thing we're doing, many of you knew my brother Dan, who was investment banker here and took a lot of companies public, and he died from brain cancer about 5 years ago. And so we funded a not-for-profit initiative called Accelerate Brain Cancer Cure to look for therapies and drive more collaboration and innovation in that space. And we feel like we're making some progress, and we then more recently created a venture fund focused on brain diseases, because we think that is an opportunity to actually make some money as well as doing some good, not just brain cancer, but also ALS and Alzheimer's and other kind of things. But for me, the real opportunity became trying to drive the healthcare system, particularly in this country, to be reorganized more around the consumer and really put the patient back at the center of the healthcare system. For 60 years, given the way payments were set up after World War II, it's really been an institutionalized system, and consumers are really not part of it. They're part of it when they're doing things to stay well. There's a whole business about fitness clubs and nutritional supplements and getting a massage that really is already very consumer-centric. But when you get a cough or your knee hurts, you move into some other system. It's called healthcare, but it's really sick care. And that's organized in a fundamentally different way. And my belief and my hope is in the next 10 or 20 years, that will change, and it will become more about consumers choosing, and therefore building a company, which we're calling Revolution Health, that gives consumers more choice and control and convenience is the core idea. We're launching a revolutionhealth.com website a week from today, and that's the beginning of a broader strategy. So for that, it was more about building a set of businesses. We committed over $100 million of initial capital, mostly from us, but also from other co-founders, including Jim Barksdale, many of you knew because he ran Netscape, and Carly Fiorina and Colin Powell and others together created this company and said, we're going to try to build a company that really can be a disruptive force and can be a change agent, and we hope it'll be successful and someday very valuable. But we also hope it will help push the system to be a little more consumer centric. So in that particular instance, there were some things where it goes back to this issue of there's a spectrum, and it kind of depends on what problem you're trying to solve and therefore what's the right tool is. In some cases, in terms of driving innovation around brain cancer, a philanthropic effort seems best. In terms of trying to create more capital flowing to companies that are doing interesting things related to brain diseases, either therapies or technologies, a venture fund seemed like the right thing to do. In terms of building a trusted consumer brand and that over time can have a broader impact on the healthcare system, having a company seemed like the best thing to do. There's not a right or wrong answer. It really depends on the situation, but also I think depends on your own interest and strengths. I mean, not everybody can play basketball. Not everybody can do ballet. Some people have skills other people don't have, and trying to leverage your own skills in the most constructive way makes sense. And I think there's not a lot of things I do well, but one of the things I do well is start companies. And so starting companies that can change the world is really what Revolution is all about.
Larry and Sergey have a great idea for a maxim for Revolution. It's focus on the user and the rest will follow.
That counts for a lot.
But steal that idea. Let me just say, so much of what we've focused on in the last day and a half and will be focusing on is the whole question of mission investing. And you've just talked about a huge investment that the two of you have decided to make. This notion of using your assets. On the one hand, philanthropists think about how they use the drawdown from their endowment to make grants. But this is the whole question of using your assets to make investments that will advance your social goals. How large a part of your lives has that become, mission investing?
It's, I think, become a big part of my life, particularly because I've been running the foundation now for 10 years, so it's what I focused most of my time on. And I have to say, we went into it knowing that there was a lot more that we didn't know than we knew. And I'm not sure how far down the line we are as we sit here today, but I think it's still really, really hard to figure out or to find really great opportunities for investment. And when we do, we realize that what they need most is a spotlight so other people know that they're great opportunities for investment. And we heard this today in the conference, which was, how do people learn about? I mean, there is capital available. How do people learn about it? So it's something we're, really focused on. But I can tell you, I think it is a lot easier for both of us to find great business investments and, feel good about those than it still is today to find great social investments. It doesn't mean they're not out there. I'm just simply saying that they're still harder to find today, in my view, than great opportunities to invest in strictly businesses.
But some of that goes back to this issue of capital structure and capital flows, because one of the reasons the hybrid approach I think has a lot of legs is the reason people are often eager to invest in a new company is they believe that if they write that check, they'll not only get that money back, but they might get a lot more back still. And on the other side, typically on the not-for-profit side, the recognition is if you write that check, you're actually going to not get any of it back, and almost certainly going to be asked again to make another contribution. So it's sort of the reverse case where essentially said, well, basically if I start writing checks, I can't stop writing checks, which is one of the lessons we learned 10 years ago. We thought we'd make a grant, and we realized that sort of there's almost an expectation that will continue. Then we started creating kind of like longer-term 5-year grants and made it very clear there is no 6th year. We're trying to jumpstart this, but we're not going to be there forever. And so looking at models where there's a little bit more of a hybrid and there is the ability to leverage capital is very powerful. AOL, we built a $100 billion company on the back of $10 million in venture capital, including Alan Patrick, obviously in the front here, is one of our venture capitalists. So we took relatively modest amount of capital. At the time, we're competing against Prodigy that had $1 billion from IBM and Sears. We had a passionate team that really believed in this idea, and were able to build a significant franchise on that. And the people who invested in that got a lot of return financially, and also felt that they helped create a revolution. And even more recently, I mentioned some of the things we're doing on the healthcare side. People I know, and including some of this audience, if they think I'm calling to ask them for a donation to accelerate brain cancer cure, they're like, ugh. And not that many, some have, but not that many people have called me and said, I'd like to write a check. But when I announced Revolution Health, I had a bunch of people calling me and said, will you take my check? And the reason is because they thought there was some possibility that there would be a significant return here, and it was less clear there. So that's the challenge in terms of the sectors. How do you use capital strategies? And ultimately, it comes down to kind of a sustainability and scalability, taking a little bit of money and turning into something big. And that's one of the challenges we're trying to focus on.
And you'll hear this afternoon that Alan Patrikoff is still up to it. He's now thinking about establishing a SME fund, a small and medium enterprise fund, focused on Africa, to build sustainable economy there, to build successful enterprises there. You've talked a lot about the ABC2 effort, and one of the findings of the Foundation Strategy Group, when they took a look at the question of what makes for an effective philanthropist, was that those who had experienced the problem they were trying to solve were sometimes the most effective. Did you find that your experience with your brother transformed you as a philanthropist?
Well, transforming as a philanthropist is probably a little broad, but absolutely the experience of understanding the difficulties of that disease, and specifically, we got a call 6 years ago in the middle of the night that you had a brain tumor, and don't worry about it, but didn't know a lot about brain tumors, but knew probably you should worry about it. And then he got his diagnosis after surgery, 2 weeks later, and basically told, given the stage of that, he probably had 6 months to live. So okay, well, start asking basic questions. What causes brain tumors? Nobody knows. What are the therapies available to treat tumors? Not many. None of them work particularly well. What's the prognosis? It's kind of a death sentence. And he said, being an entrepreneur and who helped build Genentech and Electronic Arts and Apple and many other companies, that's not good enough. And that really led to the creation of this initiative, trying to put more focus on this and try to build it up. I'd also say, though, more broadly on healthcare, some of it is informed by our own personal experiences, just having 5 kids who get sick every once in a while. And one of the businesses we're funding is a convenient care clinic business we're doing in partnership with Walgreens and Walmart and others, because people have kids that get sick on Sunday mornings, and right now they have 2 choices. One is they go to the emergency room and wait around all day. And it's a complete waste of that resource to do that. Or the other is they wait till Monday morning and pick up the phone at 7:31, hoping they'll get an appointment. It's like calling Ticketmaster to get U2 kit tickets. Busy, and if you're lucky enough to get through and lucky enough to get an appointment, inevitably it's 2 in the afternoon and you're going to miss a day of work. And it was like the question was, is it a sore throat or a strep throat? It's not that hard. And so creating a network of clinics that someday there should be thousands of them. There's 12,000 Starbucks. Shouldn't there be a few thousand convenient care clinics? We think there should. And so that's based on that kind of experience. Or our experiences dealing with the system and the whole issue of electronic medical records and how crazy it is and how complicated it is. That personal experience informed the opportunity to create that business. No differently than the personal experience we both had 20, 25 years ago, just sensing there was something in this interactive world, some way that maybe someday this would be more of a mainstream phenomenon. Because when we got on, we're using it, we thought it was pretty cool. We didn't understand why 99% of people in the country at the time were not connected to these services. Someday we believed it would be a mass market. So I think there's always some personal dynamic that makes you particularly passionate about a particular idea, whether it's a business idea or a philanthropic idea. And that passion, I think, is critical for the success of any venture. But the only other point I'd make, which is critical, is execution. There are a lot of good ideas out there. There's not a lot of great execution out there. And this is true across all sectors. And I once said that vision without execution is a hallucination. So, don't tell me. All of us have heard all kinds of great ideas, most of which don't succeed. And it's not because they weren't great ideas. They probably were great ideas. Either they didn't have the capital, or didn't have the talent, didn't have the team, didn't have the something. So it's not enough to say, I have a great idea. You have to then figure out how to put that into action and what are the strategies to do that. And some of it is about aggregating talent. Some of it is about aggregating capital. And a lot of it is about hard work.
Now, well, some portion of us hallucinate. Jean, could you say a word about right now? Is there a particular passion right now that is driving you and driving your philanthropy, or are you feeling like you're on the track you mean to be on, or is there something that's propelling you anew?
Well, I'd probably remove it just a little bit from sort of me personally and more say that I think there is a sense that we're at a point in time where we all recognize the big problems in the world and in our communities. The same old way isn't going to get us there. I mean, that's just the bottom line. So I think we're all passionately searching for what are the few levers, few approaches we might use to really change things. I mean, really start to have impact in ways we haven't been able to before. And I'm not so convinced that it really ultimately comes down to just a money problem. That's why we're so excited. I mean, following off on what Steve just said about vision and execution and going back to your earlier question about the role of other sectors or whatever. So, in this small little clean water space, the opportunity was there. The model had been proven. We're sitting in Washington, D.C. in the United States. What the heck are we going to do about execution on the ground in Africa? Turn to the U.S. government, and we had a way to actually scale this thing. There's sort of boots on the ground. In fact, the Navy's a partner with us now. But, the
Navy is a partner.
Yeah, but it's this understanding that if we work together and we all brought our core competency and sort of our unique skills and assets, well, then if everybody does a little bit, you can really get far. But if we'd come back and said, oh, this is about us, and we're going to try to, it never would have worked. It's not about us. It's about sort of looking out and being smart and picking partnerships and collaborating with all the sectors so everybody is doing what they do well, and that can assure execution beyond the vision. I mean, the vision thing is so easy. The execution thing is so hard, right? And you know, I wanted to just underscore something that Steve said, because it's maybe easy to understand how he might have received, you know, phone calls when he started Revolution, but I think just in the little brain cancer world, as we've talked about this brain cancer initiative we've had for some time now, you know, we also noted that there was a real gap in the market. And our philanthropy couldn't address that gap just because of the way the weird structures work between what you can do as a business and what you can do as a nonprofit. And it was specifically investing in small companies with great ideas, or maybe some, you know, some molecules that show great promise that could lead to therapies in this space, but the philanthropy couldn't technically invest in it for a lot of different reasons, and we couldn't because of our role in the nonprofit. And it wasn't something the traditional drug companies wanted to do because the risk was too high. So going back to this whole issue of how people think so differently, right? The same people that we, you know, sort of knew had been touched by brain cancer or whatever, that hadn't invested in our brain cancer initiative, when we went to them and said, okay, but we're going to have a brain trust fund, and it's the first tranche of a $25 million fund that we're putting together. And it's a really high-risk deal. I mean, it's, you know, these are high-risk investments. But if they pay off, they're going to pay off big, and they might actually be a therapy for brain cancer, which doesn't exist today. You know, people were just jumping into that opportunity. And so these hybrid models that we're talking about, I guess the reason we're so convinced they make a lot of sense is because, you know, when people write $1 million check into that fund, we've said to them, you may not ever see that $1 million again. But if they'd done it on the brain cancer nonprofit, they know they wouldn't see it again. There's no chance they'll see it. They're writing it and it's gone and somebody else is spending it. But over here on this fund, there's some chance they may get it back and may get it back handsomely, and they know they're making a big difference. So the whole hybrid side, we think, is just, you know, really powerful, and I think that excites us greatly in this day.
Did you want to add something? I wanted to just close with a thought, and that is that, well, number one, you made me think of the old maxim that those who don't seek credit are those who end up being the most powerful in achieving their goals. So this collaborative message, I think, is such an important one. But your offices are now 6 blocks from the White House. You have the U.S. Navy as your partner. So we know how to get there, at least through the Panama Canal from here. Tell us something about the importance of the convening power of the philanthropic world and how that might be used.
You do it. You do it. We have to convene among ourselves, decide who's going to answer the question. Now,
Neither wants credit.
We recognized there's a learning process for all of us. One lesson we learned early on is that if you're too front and center and it's not a big enough tent, it's not as interesting to as many people. We started almost 10 years ago now an initiative called Power Up that is designed to bridge the digital divide. And it was successful in that we created 1,000 technology centers, and, you know, Cisco and Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard and others joined us on the effort, and we did, you know, boys and girls clubs and a lot of different things. But to get that started, we said we'd provide most of the capital. So we invested tens of millions of dollars in that venture, and people kind of thought like it was the case's thing. And we realized that it'd be better to have kind of a broader tent and get more people involved. So that was one lesson. A second lesson, and it was a little bit bizarre, but it was, even though the Case Foundation's capital came from AOL, which helped make the internet a mainstream phenomenon, when we launched the Case Foundation, we didn't have a website. We only did one like 3 years ago. The reason is we didn't really want to talk about what we were doing. We just wanted to, quietly do it. And we didn't want to be kind of beating our chest. What we learned was that we were being selfish, that our attempt not to, be out there in terms of, declaring, what we're doing here, what we're doing there, actually was depriving the organizations we cared so passionately about with the ability to, shine a spotlight on what they're doing and potentially attract the interest of others. So we did launch a site that really is designed to do just that. We're looking, as Jean mentioned, looking at ways to expand it so that we recognize that, one of the assets we bring to bear is some brand name or credibility or a network or what have you, and how do we use that in an appropriate way to try to get behind some of the ideas that we really think are powerful. And that also ties in terms of Washington, D.C. We've been there for over 20 years. AOL was one of the big business success stories there. We just got to know a lot of different people, and how do we leverage that, and again, an appropriate way to try to get traction around some of these ideas and create an environment, much like what you're trying to do here, where people can get together and kick around different ideas. So it's less about, we learned it's less about us funding it, even less about us, what spotlight we chose to have or didn't choose to have, and more leveraging that convening, ability, or that networking ability, or that, ability to generate attention and so forth, to try to drive some of these ideas forward.
If you had one piece of advice, either of you, to give to those newest philanthropists in this room, what would it be?
I'd probably say recognize who you are and what you bring to the party, and use that most effectively, because chances are that's where your passion and your talents and your skills are. Don't reinvent yourself when you think about philanthropy. Take what you already do well, what you already have, and see how you can use it in this space, because that's where I think you'd be most effective.
Yeah, I'd say it's essentially the same thing, which is focus on the things that you really are passionate about that fully leverage your skill set. I think too often people are, think they should be playing some other role, kind of wearing some other hat, and it doesn't necessarily play to their fully to their strengths. So try to leverage it. I think there's particularly in terms of people that are younger and came into money from Google or some other company, get out there and try things, and don't be afraid to fail. It's a learning process. We described some of the learning we've done. I think you've got to get started, and you kind of have to start walking down that path, and it will iterate over time, and some doors will open and some doors will close. But you just have to keep going down that path. The last thing I'd say, which is kind of a pet peeve we both have, is to try not to reinvent the wheel. I think there's a tendency, and we've also fallen into this, if you want to do something, to start something new to do it. And one real problem in the sector is there's, I think, too many things out there, and it's too fragmented. And having, if there's something you're passionate about and somebody's already doing it, take a look at backing them before you start some other kind of initiative, and use it as an opportunity to accelerate. Obviously, the person who gets the Hall of Fame award for this is Warren Buffett, who basically said, look, I'm pretty good at creating capital. I don't know if I'm so good at kind of investing that on a not-for-profit side. I think these Gates folks over there seem like they're pretty sharp and probably be around for a while and seem to have a pretty good team, and I'm going to throw my lot in with them. And didn't say, oh, I'll do this if you'll rename it the Gates Buffett Foundation. He said, here's $40 billion, whatever the number was. That's pretty impressive. And looking at, but basically was saying, I want to make a difference in the world. I think the best way for me to make a difference is to hand that baton to somebody else who can run that next few laps better than I can. I think there's a lesson we all can learn from that in terms of really focusing on what you're great at, and maybe somebody else is better at something, and maybe it's better to back them as opposed to create something new.
And Warren Buffett does have a pretty good track record in picking winners.
He does.
Well, Jean and Steve Case, thank you so much for applying your prodigious talents to social change, and thank you for sharing your lessons learned with the rest of us. I know this group is going to be asking you questions throughout the day.